Well, good morning. This is Dan Duncan from CTK, Community Technology. We're a company that serves the nonprofit world with online software and consulting to help achieve greater impact and results. And I'm the Vice President for Impact Strategies at CTK. And I joined CTK last year after more than 30 years as a United Way professional, working on achieving impact and results. And I'm also a faculty member of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at Northwestern University. And that's kind of the background that drives my knowledge and work. And so what I'm going to talk about today is effectively tracking and reporting your impact in today's challenging environment. And I'm particularly going to focus on issues around helping your grantees or the agencies that you fund achieve greater results. So the presentation objectives today are: identify the data and indicators required to drive your impact agenda, help your grantees collect data that is relevant to outcomes-based reporting, use data to drive your agenda, and utilizing technology to enhance your reporting. So to start with, to identify the data and indicators required to drive your impact agenda. And I talked about this at my last webinar that a couple of you were on, but for those that weren't, there's two, I think, key things that help me drive my work and why it's so important to focus on outcomes. The first one is some work from Elizabeth Shore from Harvard University, who's really an expert in getting results. And she talks about 5 key things. The first one, be clear about the purposes of our work, the outcomes we are trying to achieve. So that's why it's so important that we focus on outcomes, because we have to know where we're going. And we also need to be willing to be held accountable for achieving those purposes, again, which is why community impact and outcome tracking is so important. And to create and sustain the partnerships, we need to be able to do partnerships, and to do that, again, we need to share information. We need to move audaciously into the world beyond programs, understanding that to achieve impact, we need both programs and community being involved. In my next webinar next week, on the 29th, I'm going to talk more about that piece around how do we go beyond the world of programs to achieve greater impact. And finally, we have to have the capacity to take community-wide responsibility. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between community-wide issues and programming issues. So moving on to, again, another key piece is from a book called Getting to Maybe, where they talk about the difference between simple, complicated, and complex problems. Again, I talked about this last week, but for you, those that are new today, this is really important, because this is how the importance of timely data to make the mid-course corrections necessary dealing with complex problems. Again, simple problems, baking a cake, simple recipe, simple ingredients, you get a cake. Complicated is sending a rocket to the moon, but it's still a recipe. It's just a complicated recipe, but all the variables act the same way, so you can get to the moon if you follow the plan. The complex problem is like raising a child. The variables do not always act the same. The environment has a major role to play, and that's why it's important to have information, because in the human service world, we are dealing with complex problems, not complicated problems, but complex problems, and that's why data is so important. So key definitions. One of the things that I've really found in my years is that part of the issues why grantees and agencies and funders at times have problems on outcome tracking is because they don't take the time to have a common language. Because there's a whole host of ways that you can define some of these issues, and different funders look at it different ways, agencies look at it different ways at times. So I really believe it's important that you take the time to make sure that you agree on a common language. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about definitions that I think I've found helpful in my work, working as a funder and working with agencies. So the terms I'm going to define are outcomes reporting, community-wide impact strategy, outputs, outcomes, indicators, and targets. The first one is outcome tracking itself. What is that? It's a systematic data gathering process implemented through an organization to provide the information necessary to define the program project success, track activities and results, and make informed decisions. So that's what outcome tracking is about. So it helps you define the program project success, understand the components and process of success, prove program project success, make informed decisions, and it also enables agencies and funders in some cases to qualify for more and larger grants and donations if you have a good outcomes tracking program. The next one is the Community-Wide Impact Strategy Statement. As we know, many funders today have realized that they have to become focused. So they're not just trying to sort of boil the ocean or be all things to all people, but are focusing on some very specific community-wide issues. And so that's what the Community-Wide Impact Strategy is. And many funders have done that now. For example, the Annie Casey Foundation. All children need and deserve lifelong connections to a safe and caring family. Here in Austin, Texas, where we're located, the Austin City Connection promote community-wide wellness. And we do have somebody from the United Way, Carla, on the webinar today. So I want to talk about, at least in America, the goals for the common good. The United Way of America is, and many United Ways across the country are now focused on education, income, and health in very specific ways with very specific outcomes. So again, that's an example of those community-wide strategies. But one of the things that's important to understand is that community-wide outcomes and indicators, the data for that and the results, are collected from community-wide data, not agency data. Again, one of the things I've seen is sometimes funders try to roll up agency or agency level, client level outcome data into the community-wide outcomes. And you really can't do that. You need to find ways to collect community-wide data from school districts, from the census, whatever that may be, to tell you whether you are in fact making a difference in your community. Individual agencies themselves should not and cannot be held accountable for changes in that overall community-wide result, because it takes a whole host of strategies to do that. No one agency can do it. So the good way to think about it is they certainly can contribute to those community-wide outcomes, but they should not and cannot be held accountable. But they must and can be held accountable for their own results. So again, back to Elizabeth Shore's comments. Agencies must be held accountable for their results. Funders need to be held accountable for our results as well. So it is about accountability, but we just have to be careful that we don't put too much responsibility on individual agencies or strategies to drive that community-wide outcome. So again, they can contribute, but they should not be held accountable. The second definition, outputs. Outputs measure the magnitude of the activities of an agency's program or service. Again, the number of people served, number of hours of service provided, the amount of resources provided. So examples would be the number of youth participating in the after-school program during the year, the hours of counseling provided during the school year, or the amount of emergency assistance provided during the year. So outcomes, again, or outputs measure productivity as I think about it. Outcomes themselves are changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances for individuals or populations as a direct result of participating in a program. So again, outcomes are changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances. So a sample outcome is permanent housing for homeless individuals in our community, more youth graduating from high school. So those are samples of outcomes. Outcomes typically do not have numbers tied to them. They are just what is that change in behavior, attitudes, conditions, or knowledge that you're trying to achieve with a program or a strategy. So the next part of that then is the indicators. And indicators are a measure which helps quantify an output or an outcome. Indicators are definable, quantifiable, measurable, and collectible. So sample indicators would be the number of youth in the program, the number of hours of counseling provided, or the number or percent of program participants who will successfully acquire permanent housing. So again, the indicators are how you're going to measure whether you've achieved outputs or outcomes. How are you going to do that? What are you going to measure? And then the targets, the final one, are targets, the goals set for each program or service's outputs and outcomes. The number of clients or units of service projected to be served during the funding year, the number of percent of your clients that will achieve the identified outcome or the indicator. And again, sample is 1,245 youth will participate in the after-school program, 4,500 hours of counseling will be provided during the school year, or 80% of program participants will successfully acquire permanent housing. So, all right, let me move on then, which is help your funded agencies collect data that is relevant to outcome-based reporting. There are three critical questions for effective outcomes-based reporting that I think you need to ask your agencies and yourselves as you begin to do this work. The first one is, how productive are we? The second is, are we doing things right? And the third are we doing the right things? The answers become the basis for outcome-based reporting. And it starts with, and I've developed this based on some work by Mark Friedman, who does results-based accountability and some other work that I've been involved with. And this is, for me, it's been a helpful kind of chart to help agencies and funders understand kind of how they can best achieve this work. So the first one is the effort and quantity at the top left hand, which answers the question is, how productive are we? As a funder, I want to know how productive our agencies are. Are they serving 5 people, or are they serving 100? Are they providing 5 hours of counseling for each, or are they providing 100 hours of counseling for each? So this is where we address the issue of effort and quantity, so that we have the number of clients served, the number of activities, the number of units of service provided. Again, that doesn't tell us anything about the quality. All it addresses is quantity and effort. The second quadrant answers the question, are we doing things right? And this is where we look at client satisfaction, retention data, and following our protocols. Because we do know as an agency or as a funder, we do want to know, are our clients pleased? Are they engaged in the process? That's why I think retention data is so important. And are we following our protocols? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? As we go through this, just to take a second and tell a story about retention data, I think that's so important, because you can have the best programs in the world, great protocols, but if people don't stay in the program long enough, they'll never get the benefit of the program. So I think this is particularly important in youth development, youth serving agencies, where they have a great program, and we know if kids are involved in a program for a long time, whether that's scouting, whether that's a mentoring program, those kinds of things, that kids have a real potential to do well if they're in the program. But if they don't stay in the program long enough, that could really create some problems. So that's why retention data is so important. I was working with an agency when I was in Indianapolis, the scouting agency, and we were talking, they were confused and they didn't know how to do outcomes, and they were trying to figure out how best to do that. And I said, well, the first thing you need to start with is retention data. Because if you don't have a good way of knowing whether the kids are staying in your program long enough, then it doesn't matter about the outcomes from my perspective, because they're not going to get any benefit of a great program if they're only in it 2 or 3 months, when it may take a year for some of those good activities to occur. So this, again, the second one is quality and effort, which answers the question, are we doing things right? But again, that doesn't really tell us whether we're making a difference in the community. And that's why the third question is so important, and that question is, are we doing the right things? Are we doing activities that do in fact change behavior, attitudes, knowledge, or conditions? Are we doing the right things? And over on the left side, it's about quantity and effect. So that's the number of people that learn new skills, new knowledge, the number of clients that achieve new attitudes or new opinions or knowledge, the number that change their behaviors, the number that change their circumstances. So that begins to tell us what magnitude are we having around quantity and the effect. And then when you apply the percentage to that, are 80% of our clients getting better, are 20% getting better, that begins to tell you what you need to do to either take the program to scale, or do you need to change some of your protocols because you're not having as large of an impact as you could have. Again, a side note on that, and in most part as a funder, I found that we really don't want an agency to say that 100% of their clients do better, because that may indicate that they are just selecting people that don't really need their service so they can achieve greater results. So in some cases, if they're dealing with a hard-to-serve population, a 20% result may be very positive. So you have to understand the target population, who an agency is dealing with, before you can evaluate the percentage to see if that's a good percentage or bad percentage. But my experience said if an agency is doing just 100% for all of their programs, then that may not be that they're attracting the type of client that you really as a funder would like them to focus on. So again, let me stop right now and see if there are any questions or thoughts or comments about this chart, and whether you think it'd be helpful for you. So I'd love to have a little dialogue. We've got a good group of people around the table. or around the webinar. So are there any comments or questions?
This is Ann from Rochester.
Hi, Ann.
And I'm looking at this chart. I work with startup organizations, and I can see where this would be really, really handy when you're starting your nonprofit organization. If you get this embedded in the way you work, it's going to be really easy to talk to funders and grant makers about why they should fund programs and processes that you have.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, just to go on what Ann said, this is Carla from the United Way in Ontario, Canada. And this is exactly what we're giving our potential agencies, the information that we're giving them. This is what we want to see to fund their agencies. The retention data, that was something that I hadn't thought of, and that's a very interesting piece. I wondered if you had maybe a bit more information you could give us on the uses for retention data?
Sure, I'll be glad to. Again, retention data is important because it tells you a couple things. It does tell you about client satisfaction, because if people come into the program and they leave very quickly after they enter the program, then that's telling you that you may not be doing some things to help keep them in the program long enough. So you want to look at that. It'll give you a chance to look at your protocols and some of the things that you are doing, how welcoming you are, etc. The other, as I talked about earlier, the other importance of retention is that as part of your theory of change, as an agency or a program, they should have some sense as to their theory of change of how long it takes for clients to be engaged in their program. Is it a 1-month program? Is it a 12-month program, 2-year program, whatever that may be, to get the maximum benefit. So it would be important for you to be able to track that so that you can tell, are people staying in the program long enough to get the benefits? Because as I highlighted earlier, it could be the best program in the world, but if kids don't stay in it long enough, then they're not going to get any of the benefit. And that's why I find it really important for agencies to have a way to really track their retention in their program and tie that retention specifically to what they're trying to accomplish and what they think their theory of change is. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let me move on, and I think the next chart is another way to kind of help.
I do. I have one question before you move on.
Okay.
For the quality measures in the effort category, how do you show those? Do you show those as numbers or percent?
You could actually show those either. I think probably the quality and effort, probably percentages would be a good way to do that. So you could say 80% of our clients stay in the program a minimum of 6 months, or in the client satisfaction, we do a client satisfaction survey, and 87% of our clients say that they are pleased with the program or service. So I think.
And do these have to relate back to the initial ones in the first box?
Well, they should be the same people. So again, if we're serving in this time frame 100 clients, of those 100 clients we served, how many and what percent highlighted satisfaction, how many of them stayed in the program a minimum of 3 months, would be telling you that. And the other piece, following protocols, may not be a percentage. That you just may need to be able to identify, are our staff or volunteers doing what we said we were going to do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about protocols in the next slide as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. So moving on, where do we start? When I work with agencies, talking to them about how do they begin to do their outcome tracking and create, as I like to call it, a learning environment. How does an agency create that learning environment, as Carla was highlighting, so they've embedded these kinds of thoughts into their DNA, if you will, is really important. And for me, it starts with one thing. The first thing it starts with their organization's mission. What does their board feel that they're about? What is the mission of the organization? And we need to make sure that they understand their mission, so as they apply for grants as to a funder or do those kinds of things, or look for other funding, they're not creating what we call mission creep, where they're getting beyond their mission just because they're looking for money. So one of the things that you need to highlight to agencies is stick to your knitting, stick to your mission, and don't just chase money. The second then is looking at their funder's community-wide impact statement and their agency's role. So again, in the context of their mission, is there a role for them to address that RFP or that funder's community-wide impact statement? So if you're, again, a foundation working on financial stability, or a funder working on financial stability, does that relate to the organization's mission, and do they have the ability to do that? So those would be the first two pieces. The third one would be, do they think that they could attract potential other donors' interest if they begin to do this? Because they don't want to get into a program where this one funder is their total funder for this. When I was a funder, one of my principles is that I never wanted to fund anything I could kill. And what I meant by that is I don't want to be the sole funder of any program. Because if my money made the difference, or my United Way's money when I was in the United Way world made the difference of whether this program continued or not, then I didn't want to do that, because that highlighted that potentially the community didn't support that program to the extent that it needs to. So again, agencies need to look for a diversified funding base in anything that they're going to start. So they aren't just looking at one funder to do that. And then finally, once they've set this umbrella of these issues, the next thing is really, as I like to describe it, identify the components of their strategy or their program that they believe makes their work unique and successful. When I talk to agencies, I'll often say, okay, let's not start collecting just what the funder wants. Because you need to have a learning community, let's look at the components of your program that you think make your program really unique. The components of your program which you think is better than the agency down the street, which is why we ought to fund you rather than funding another agency. Let's start there, and let's make sure we can measure the components of your program that you think make your program unique. Because there's more energy and enthusiasm for an agency to begin to focus on that than to focus on things that maybe just the funder wants. And if they first focus on their activities that they think make them unique, I've found that they'll be able to very easily find ways to track the other things if there are different things that a funder may want. I'll again tell you a story. I was working again in Indianapolis with an agency, and it was a child care agency that actually provided infant care. And I was meeting with them because they wanted to begin to track outcomes, but they said, well, kids, infants, they're babies. What kind of outcomes could we possibly track? That they turned over in 6 months or early, or what would be the issue? And so then I went back to them and said, what are the components of your program, your child care program, your infant care program that you think is unique? And they said, one of the things we do is that we do, I think they called it the Denver test, which is a test to identify whether the infant has any potential developmental delays. And if they take that test and it looks like there may be some developmental delays, they then refer that family for further testing and further work with a professional. So I said, that's great. That's a unique piece of your program. That's part of your theory of change and the work that you do. So do you ever measure whether the agency or the families follow up with and get further testing or talk to a professional? And they said, no, we don't do that. Why would we do that? And I said, well, you need to know whether the way you do it works. You need to know whether your protocols do in fact work so that families are following up. Because if you survey the families and find out that 80% of the families are in fact following up and getting further testing and talking to a professional, then that really begins to tell you that, gee, maybe we're doing it right. We just need to fine tune it a little bit, but we also need to make sure that we are capturing our protocols so that when new staff comes in, we can tell them exactly how to do it so that we can continue to get those results. If 20% of the families follow up, only 20, that probably tells them that they're not doing it as effectively as they could. They may not be identifying all the barriers that are there, like cost or time or transportation or whatever that may be, or just the way they tell the family. So they need to change their protocols so that they can, in fact, get more of the families to follow up based on that. So that's just a quick example of how working with agencies you can begin to get them to think in a mode of being a learning community, to see the value of data and information. Because then, in particular, when you tie that or start that with what do they think is unique in their program, that gets them excited about it from my experience, so that they're more apt to begin to follow your ideas and your recommendations relative to outcomes tracking. Using data to drive your community impact agenda, or the agenda in your community that you're working on, which is very important. There's 3 levels of data, as I talked about earlier. One is at the community level data. So again, if we're trying to make community change, whether that's high school graduation rate, whether that's income levels, whether that's health disparity, health issues in the community, that is collected from community-wide data levels, not from individual agencies. But again, you look to the health department, the school districts, the census, whatever that is, to collect that information. The second level of data is at the strategy level. So if you are funding 3 or 4 programs to do the same thing, then you want to look at that at the strategy level, and you want to have a way to collect that data from multiple agencies to track whether your strategy is working that you're funding. And then finally, the program level data, the individual agencies or programs that you're funding, being able to track that data so that you can be held accountable at all 3 levels, number 1. Number 2, so that you have the information that you need to make the mid-course corrections that are so important when you're dealing with complex problems. Because we've all know the concept of logic models. Logic models are very helpful because they begin to focus our work and develop a theory of change for our work. But we know that not everybody that goes in one end of a logic model is going to magically come out at the other end with the same result, because we're dealing with people and we're dealing with complex problems. So we have to have that flexibility to make that mid-course correction, or make mid-course corrections, and you need data and information to do that. So what I'm going to do is show you an example of how to track that data at all 3 levels. And I am using charts and graphs and information from our database system, our systems that we provide or we sell to funders and nonprofits. But again, you can do this in any system potentially. But I am showing it using our system. But it's to really focus on how do you collect and demonstrate and tell the story at all 3 levels. So the sample is an after-school program, and the community-wide impact strategy is education. We're trying to increase graduation rates, and that's why one of our strategies is an after-school program. So the outputs would be the number of youth served and the units of service provided, the after-school days that are provided by the providers, and the strategy outcome is youth developing skills, competencies in an out-of-school time program that prepare them for college, work, and life. And this is actually a real example from our work when I was with the United Way of Tucson and Southern Arizona. So this was the outcome that we had in our after-school programs, and all of the agencies that we funded agreed to the same outcome. So the after-school program was tied to skill development, and the strategy indicator was results from a pre- and post-test. All agencies agreed to use the same test. So when kids entered the program, they were tested, and every quarter they were tested to see if they were in fact learning new skills. And the strategy targets were 4,428 youth to be served in the after-school program during the funding year, 10,000 units of service with after-school days, and 60% of the youth participants will score higher on their post-test skills. So that is the framework for our example here of showing how we can collect this data. So it starts with the community-wide data. So this is a graph tracking the graduation rates. So this is community-wide data. So this is actually collected from the school districts, highlighting the total number of youth in the school, the number of graduated, and the dropouts, so we can calculate the graduation rates. So this is again showing that data for that, so you could set the stage at the community-wide level. So now here is the strategy level data and the program level data. And this is again collected from the agencies, partners, neighborhoods, those responsible for implementing the strategy or program. And here is a quarterly reporting form that we used in Tucson, actually, again, in the system, to collect that information on a quarterly basis from agencies. One of the nice things and the important things of using an online system, as I'll talk a little later, is the ability to get quarterly or more recent data, real-time data. So here is the, again, just the program fourth quarter report for this program. And here is the target. This agency said that they would serve 3,000 youth in their program during the year. This quarter they served 589, which is the fourth quarter. So totally for the year, this agency served 2,595 kids. They said they would provide 4,500 after school days, the units of service. This quarter they served 947 for a total of 4,619. This is the outcome reporting. The outcome was, again, youth developing skills competencies in an out-of-school time program that prepared them for college, work, and life. The indicator, the post-test, or the pre and post-test every 3 months. And the target, this agency said 1,000, or 33% of their kids would do better on the post-test. This quarter, 185 did better for a total of 967 that did better during the year, because again, this is the fourth quarter report that we're looking at. So here is just a sample of data that you can then pull from those quarterly reports from those 5 agencies, in this case, that were in this after-school program. So here is the tracking again each quarter, first, second, third, fourth, for each agency, highlighting the number of people, number of youth they said they would serve, how many they served each quarter, and those percent of the total. So again, 457 is 15% of 3,000. So you can track that. You can also look at it graphically, so you can see how the agencies are doing relative to the number of youth that they said they would serve and the number of units of service, so that you can track that to see, again, this is answering that question, is how productive are they? If the goal is to serve 3,000 kids, we want to make sure that this agency is on track. So you can see they typically ought to be at 25% each quarter unless it's a special summer program. So you can see Brighter Tomorrow was actually below the curve the first 2 quarters and then caught up on the third quarter. So again, you have that real-time data to make those mid-course corrections or make sure agencies that you fund are on track. And here it is looking collectively for each of the agencies, how are they doing during the quarters, so that you can track that and know collectively at the strategy level how are all of the agencies doing relative to their results. And then now you have very quickly at the end of the year, you can highlight that collectively, remember, the 5 agencies said they would serve their target was to serve 4,428 kids. They actually served 4,738, so they exceeded the number. So again, you can go back to your donors, go to the community, and say, thanks to your support in this strategy, we're actually able to serve more kids in the after-school program. Again, that's measuring productivity, answering the first question, not the outcomes question. You could also track demographics if you want your agencies to report demographics relative to ethnicity, age, gender, those kinds of things. So you have real-time snapshots of that information as well, so that you can see whether agencies are serving sort of the hard to serve or the toughest clients. So you need at times to collect that demographic data as well, so that you can do that. And then now we move on to the outcome achievement. So this is tracking each agency each quarter, remember, where they were highlighting how many kids actually did better on the post-test. How many met that indicator, that measurement, and did better. So looking at Brighter Tomorrows, the first quarter they said, remember, 1,000 kids would do better on the post-test. 457 did better the first quarter, which is 46%. The second quarter, 17. The third quarter, 16. And the fourth quarter, 19%. So you can track that also here graphically if you want, so you have a sense of what agencies are in fact getting those results that they promised or that they contracted with you as a funder to achieve, so that you can track that. And then looking at it as summary at the year end, here is for each of the agencies, again, Brighter Tomorrows said 1,000 kids would do better on their post-test. Totally for the year, 967 did better. You can see that graphically up here as well. Leaders for Tomorrow said 510 kids would do better, only 416 did, so they were down 18%. So again, that may mean we want to talk to that agency before we fund them again. The other 3 agencies actually exceeded their goals, as you can see. So when you look at it collectively, you can actually see that the strategy, again, this one is at the program level. Now we're moving to the strategy level, where we can highlight that our goal was for 2,670 kids to do better on the post-test, and actually 2,693 did better. So again, you can highlight on a graphic or on a dashboard kind of approach that we actually did exceed our goal. And more youth learned new skills last year in the after-school programs in our community. So again, you have the ability to dashboard those kinds of things, whether it's exceeding the number of kids that were in the program at the output level, and then at the outcome level being able to dashboard that. So you can demonstrate at the strategy level that you were able to achieve greater results and more kids learned new skills. So let me stop there and see if there are any questions or comments relative to how do you kind of pull all that information together to track your results. Again, *8 to take you off mute. Are there any questions or comments, or just let me know if you're still there and if whether this was helpful.
I'm still here. This is Renee from Bloomington. This has been really helpful as we're moving into, changing the way that we're granting out our dollars and looking at more outcome-based granting, looking to see that we're making a difference in the community. So this is going to be helpful.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dan, this is Carla again. Just regarding the software itself, I'm just interested what maybe you're getting into that now, technology, to I just saw some really neat reports that you were showing there, and I wondered about the software that you used to put that together.
Yeah, again, that is our software, and I'll be glad to talk to you, and I'll contact you offline to do that, because this is this is not a sales webinar. This is a webinar really around education, around impact and tracking. So I'll be glad to follow up with you, Carla, to highlight that. And anybody else that wants more information, please feel free to contact me. But I'm really trying to not make this a sales presentation, but really focusing on education and results, because I know people appreciate that. So let me kind of just follow up now, just to do a quick poll, though, just because I think helpful among each other to see. So I wanted to do a quick poll, which is just to highlight are you any of you using technology already? So if you could just go ahead and highlight there. All right, looks like most of you have now voted. And just to show you the results here, 57% are not using technology, 43% are. So a little less than half are now using technology, just so you understand kind of where you are around the table together as we go forward. So let me just kind of summarize some concepts and thoughts around technology, the power of technology to enhance your impact. Again, to make the necessary mid-course corrections that is so critical, you need timely information, and technology can facilitate that and facilitate and streamline the grant-making process, whether that's the application, proposal, review, decision-making, and reporting. Enhance communication between your agencies and partners, and improve your ability to get results and tell your story to your donors and funders. So without technologies, remember these old days, I remember this, where agencies submitted a year-end report, usually on paper in various formats, and most of that information was submitted too late to help change strategies. It's a little late to wait a year to find out an agency wasn't doing what you thought they were going to do. And the agencies rarely saw their information used by funders because, again, we got all that information, we couldn't do a lot of it with it, so it ended up in a file drawer somewhere. And they had limited information to improve their programs and services. So with technology, agencies can submit their information when you need it, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually. The information is submitted in a uniform format to facilitate effective analysis and mid-course corrections. And agencies see their information used by funders. In Tucson, when we went to an online system for, again, those quarterly reports, as you saw, we were able to dashboard that information literally 2 or 3 days after the agency submitted it at the end of a quarter. And we then sent that back to the agencies, put it on our website, so agencies saw our information being used. And so that made it much more, that really encouraged that teamwork that's important, and it encouraged them to provide the information because they saw it was being used. Also, agencies have additional real-time information that they can use to improve their programs. In addition, as a United Way, we had data every quarter so that we could utilize that in our fundraising, whether at the campaign or at a grant or with a major donor. We could go and say, look, these 3 agencies are getting great results in this after-school program. If you could provide a little more funding this year, we could even do more. So it really helped enhance our fundraising as well. And so again, how do you report the data? Again, focusing on these key issues, identifying your United Way or your United Way or your foundation's impact statement and potential donors' interest, and make sure as an agency that you're focusing on those. And it's also important to report the right data. And it's, what I mean by that is communication power. Will funders and donors understand the data? You don't want to collect things that are so esoteric that people don't even understand it and don't understand the difference. That's why graduation rates is such a strong data point, because everybody understands what graduating from high school versus not graduating from high school means. If you were just talking about some SAT LYC test, people may not know what that is. Also, making sure that your data that you collect relates to that community-wide impact strategy or your donors' interests. Don't start collecting data that doesn't have anything to do with what the funder, or providing that data if it doesn't interest the donor or the funder. Also, you do not need to report everything. As Mark Friedman talks about, data travels in herds. So you don't have to collect everything. You just want to look for what are those lead horses, or what are those key data points that most of the other data surrounds, and just focus on collecting those things. And then finally, make sure that data is easily collectible and replicable. You don't want to collect data that costs a lot to do or is very complex and complicated to do, so you can't do it on a regular basis. So you want to find those things that have strong communication power, that they relate to what you're trying to achieve, and you don't have to report everything, just find some key items, and make sure that the data that you are collecting is easily collectible, because you don't want to spend more money collecting the data than actually delivering the program as you move forward. Well, just to remind you, there is the next webinar is next Tuesday the 29th on Do Needs Assessments Really Tell You What You Need to Know? And I'm going to talk about alternative strategies for greater impact. So how do we engage the community? How do we use data to do that at the community-wide level? That's what I'm going to talk about. I'll also remind you, when you log out, there will be a questionnaire, kind of a quick survey that helps me design new webinars. So looking for additional suggestions. For example, the needs assessment question actually came out of an earlier webinar. So please take a few minutes to answer the survey. And with that, I want to thank everyone for participating today. And I will follow up. I'll send you all the PowerPoint presentation, as well as answer any other questions that you may have. So if there are no other comments, we'll sign off. Any other questions or comments?
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining me today, and everyone have a great day. Thank you very much.